Hello, and welcome to the Doing Business with Army Contracting Command Research Triangle Park, or RTP, Division webinar, hosted by the Army HBCU-MI Student Program for Army Research and Knowledge, or as we call it, SPARK. Today's webinar focuses on the foundational topic of doing business with the Army, specifically through the Army Contracting Command Research Triangle Park, or ACC RTP Division. This session is tailored to help HBCU MI faculty understand how to engage with the Army through research partnership and contract-based opportunities. We are honored to welcome today's featured speakers, Ms. Lanelle T. Shands, Branch Chief, and Mr. William A. Creech, Team Leader, both from the ACC RTP Division. They will provide a practical overview of the Army's contracting process, including how requirements are developed, how solicitations are issued, and how awards are made. Today's session will also explore the variety of award mechanisms the Army uses when working with academic institutions. Ms. Shands and Mr. Creech will share insights into how these mechanisms support research, development, and innovation, helping faculty participants better understand what it takes to compete for Army opportunities and how their institutions can position themselves for success. Whether you're just starting to consider Army collaborations or looking to deepen an existing relationship, this webinar will offer valuable guidance and a direct connection to contracting leaders at ACC RTP. My name is Crystal Nolan, and before we begin, I'd like to briefly go over the webinar format. Please keep your microphone muted during the presentation. During the Q&A session, you will be invited to unmute and ask questions. Alternatively, you can submit questions at any time via the chat, and we will compile them for the speakers to address during the Q&A. If you have questions about using the Zoom platform for this event, please feel free to enter them in the chat window right now. Technical support is on hand to help you with any issues you may be having. And also, not just right now, but if anything happens during the webinar, you can contact technical support via the chat option. Finally, within the next few weeks, we will send a link to the webinar recording to everyone who registered. This will allow you to revisit key parts of the presentation and the Q&A, or to share it with colleagues who may find it valuable. And with that, I'll turn it over to our Army Contracting Command speakers.
All right. Good afternoon. Can everyone hear me?
Absolutely.
Hi, Crystal. How are you?
I'm doing well.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. So I have my camera on right now, and I'm gonna turn it off once I start sharing the slides. But I'd like to welcome you to our presentation this afternoon. My name is Lanelle Shands. I am a branch chief with the Army Contracting Command, Aberdeen Proving Ground Research Triangle Park Division. I am located in RTP, North Carolina. I am here today with one of my team leaders, William Creech, and we're here to, I think we only have an hour, so it's never enough time, but want to go over with each one of y'all how to do business with the Army Contracting Command. We want to talk about a few types of award instruments. And for those award instruments that we're not able to get to today, hopefully we are able to set up a webinar in the near future to be able to dive into those award instruments. We will also talk about how you go about applying for those award instruments. We'll also talk about a little bit about research protection and some other just pertinent matters when you're doing business with the Army. All right, let me try to share my screen. All right, are y'all able to see the screen, the slides on the screen?
Yep, perfect.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. All right. So let's see. All right. So the agenda here, I'd say we're going to talk about some funding instruments. We'll talk about how to award, to get those funding instruments. And I'm going to talk a little bit about research protection, some closeout processes. And we're going to try to allow at least 10, 15 minutes for questions, because this is y'all's time. And we want to allow for y'all to ask those burning, questions that y'all have. So with that being said, I'm going to let Mr. William Creech start talking about funding instruments.
Good afternoon, everybody. Will Creech, as Lanelle mentioned, I'm one of the team leaders here with ACC APG RTP. So I'm here located in North Carolina with Ms. Shands, and really excited to be here. And we've got a lot of really good jam-packed information that we want to provide to y'all today. So we'll go ahead, as Lanelle mentioned, and we'll get starting talking a little bit about funding instruments. So the first question might be, what do we mean by funding instrument? It's just kind of a weird term, like kind of what is it when you first hear it? As you can see here on the screen, when we talk about a funding instrument, it is something that the federal government gives money to some other organization for some purpose. So it's a fancy way of saying, hey, we're just giving money to somebody. We're giving funding to somebody for something. You may also commonly hear the terms agreement, funding agreement, or award. They're sometimes used interchangeably, but that's essentially what we're talking about today, how we get money from one organization to another. Next slide. So I kind of like to think of funding instruments as tools in our toolbox. We've got a large variety of funding instruments that we can issue. We're going to focus on a couple today. We'll talk a little bit about procurement contracts, but the vast majority of the time today we're going to be spending talking about assistance instruments, which specifically we'll be talking about grants and cooperative agreements, because that's what we mostly see with our university research partners. We can go on to the next slide. So procurement contracts. Big question is, when you hear procurement contract, what exactly are we funding? What are we getting out of this? So when we talk specifically about procurement contracts, we are talking about something that the federal government is buying for our direct benefit. Again, that is something the federal government is buying for our direct benefit, for the government's benefit. So these could be things like jet aircraft, jet fuel, missiles, could be grass cutting services, it could be IT support services. I mean, it can run the gamut. And one of our mission partners that we have here that we work with, the Army Research Office, we buy things anywhere from computers to administrative support services to even military specific research and development. So a lot of different things can be bought under a procurement contract. So it's not just limited to, a trinket or a bauble. It's actually can be services, could really be anything. We're going to go ahead and move on to the next slide, talking a little bit more about procurement contracts. This is the most common form, and it's traditionally what you think about when you're talking about contracting, or you hear the word contracting. It is that buyer-seller relationship. It's that transactional relationship where the government is looking to buy something and either a university or another organization is willing to sell something, whether that is a physical item or a service. So it's that buyer-seller relationship that you even see in your everyday lives. With procurement contracts, there are a lot of regulations and their compliance with a bunch of different rule books, as we like to call them. The biggest one that you're going to be most familiar with, or you've probably heard about before, is the FAR, which stands for Federal Acquisition Regulations. And then internally within the Department of Defense and the Army, we have our own supplements to those regulations. The DFARS is the Defense Supplement to the Federal Acquisition Regulation, and then the AFARS is the Army Supplement to the Federal Acquisition Regulations. Just as a side note here, when we're talking about the FAR and the DFARS and the AFARS, they're currently going through and doing some updating and looking at that, trying to streamline some procurement processes. So we're not sure what the FAR and DFARS and the AFARS may look like long term, but as of this recording, 14 May 2025, those are some of the rule books that you would have to comply with if you did ever receive a procurement contract, and there would be items that would be subject to in there. With a contract, one of the things that is always in it, there's some type of requirement or something that we are putting the contract or letting that contract for. So it's going to identify that, hey, the government is buying X number of items from this organization, or the government is getting this kind of service from an organization. And it's going to spell out in very fine detail, hey, what we're planning on doing, what we're going to be providing, and what's going to be delivered to the government. So that's going to be spelled out explicitly in your award document, in that contract document. Another unique feature of a procurement contract is the ability to earn fee and or profit on that contract. And again, that's just money you get for providing the service or delivering the good in accordance with the contract. So that is, again, a big difference from some of the other items that we're going to talk about a little bit later today, is that a contract is the only mechanism that will allow you to obtain fee and profit. And last but certainly not least, there are many different tools that go with contracts. There are reporting tools that you have to log into if there are subcontracts that you have under your contract. So there's just a number of different systems that interact with that contract for monitoring. Now, on the flip side of instrument types that we also have assistance instruments, grants and cooperative agreements, which is what we're going to spend a lot of time talking about. So with a contract, we said, hey, it's for direct benefit of the United States government. It's for our benefit. With an assistance award, you can almost think of it like an investment, so to speak. It's for a public purpose of support and stimulation. We are providing funding for that assistance. So a really good example I like to provide with a lot of our university partners that y'all are probably familiar with is a Pell Grant. That's money that an individual applies for that they can receive to go to school to further their knowledge. The funding is a way to assist them in getting new skills, becoming more educated, furthering the overall benefit of society. So there's a lot that goes into it, and that's a key item for every grant and cooperative agreement, is that public purpose. So a lot of what we're going to be doing here and what we're going to be talking about are public purpose that Lanelle and I are very familiar with, and most of the awards that we issue, those are going to be from the research and development lens. We're looking at going to be furthering science. So a lot of the slides we have for presentation today are going to kind of have that lens to them. And again, just to reiterate and highlight both procurement contracts and assistance awards here. Procurement contracts, government is buying something because we need it, whether that is something for the warfighter, ammunition, jet fuel for an airline, or grass cutting services to keep a base in shape, versus an assistance instrument where we're investing in something, we're providing assistance to further a public purpose. So we'll go ahead and move on to our next slide here. And just to kind of highlight something here, that every federal agency, will do contracts. It's kind of like your base item. It's almost like a fork and a knife and a spoon. It's your basic tools that everyone has to work with. Everyone has them. It does not matter whether it's the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marine Corps, Health and Human Services, the Department of Education, Homeland Security. Every federal agency, every government agency can issue contracts. They do it for what they need. Very, very, very few organizations and agencies have the authority to issue assistance instruments. And again, that's one of the big differentiating factors with an assistance instrument, is that it's only when you have that specific authority or specific reason to use it. So you can almost liken it to toolboxes. Everyone can use a hammer to drive down a nail. Not everyone might have the specific type of saw they need to cut a piece of wood. So again, it's differences that we have and different things that we can look at. So digging into our assistance instruments a lot more. As I mentioned on the previous slide, you have to have authority to use these. If anyone on the webinar or in this meeting today has ever received an assistance award from our organization, you've probably seen it mentioned something like 10 USC 4001 or 10 USC 4144. Those are the specific authorities that have been granted to us to make those awards. So you'll always see that listed in an assistance instrument. Much like contracts, assistance instruments also have their own rule books. One of those such rule books is actually 2 CFR 200. We commonly refer to this as the uniform guidance. It's the big overall picture of, hey, this is how the federal government would like to manage, and it's assistance instruments, how we handle them, what we do with them. There's also still some parts of the Dodgers, which is the Department of Defense, grant and agreement regulations in existence that we sometimes refer to with different aspects of assistance awards or assistance instruments, excuse me. Traditionally, contracting does take a while. Contracts are very labor intensive. They are very heavy instruments. They take a long time to actually get out the door and get to the recipient, get to our contractor to get them working. Whereas an assistance award, usually we can award those much faster. Not all the time, but usually they're faster, quicker instruments that will get you on your way and working. The biggest difference with an assistance instrument, though, and I talked about this on the contract side, is that contracts will allow you fee or profit. On an assistance award, and this is something we need to drive home here, an assistance award, you cannot charge a fee or profit, whether it's the prime or any of your subs. If there's a fee or profit, we cannot do it as an assistance award, and no assistance award ever gets issued if there is a fee or profit included. So that's something that we have to adhere to, we have to hold to. So just, keep that in the back of your mind, that if you're looking at trying to make some money while you're proposing or working with the federal government, that's automatically going to land you in the contract arena. If you're just trying to further some research, we may be able to do it as an assistance award, assuming it meets a lot of additional items. Much different from our contracts. There aren't a whole lot of online systems that you have to log into to really do anything with. Wide area workflow might be the one that y'all are familiar with in terms of submitting invoices, but there aren't any systems where you have to log in saying, hey, we had subcontractors, or, we've submitted this report or that report. So they do tend to be a little bit more streamlined. And last but not least, another big difference is that on assistance awards, we can't buy any item. We're providing assistance to further a public purpose. So there's no physical deliverable on an assistance award. We're usually getting some kind of report that talks about, hey, this is the amazing science that we've done. And if there is some physical item that does come to the government, it is usually incidental, that was created as proof of concept. So remember, any deliverables, they're incidental, and that you're just not going to have a physical item coming to the government under an assistance award. So we'll go ahead and move on to our next area here. We're going to spend a little bit of time here talking about the very specific types of assistance instruments we have. The first type we're going to talk real quickly about are grants. With a grant, when we're funding a grant, we're going to be doing some research that the government needs, but there is not going to be substantial government involvement. And we'll talk a little bit about what we mean by substantial government involvement a little bit later on, but basically it's very laissez-faire if you're familiar with that economic term. It's hands off. You're doing the research, you're giving the government a report that says, hey, this is the wonderful stuff that we've done. And the government's like, hey, cool, we're good with that. We're not in the nitty-gritty and the trenches with you. It's a very, very, very simple agreement. It's probably the simplest type of assistance instrument there is. As I mentioned previously, we mostly have this with universities. I'd say about 99.95% of all the grants I've ever issued have gone to universities. And what makes them even simpler is we don't have a very bullet point statement of work saying, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. We've got a research proposal from y'all that's incorporated into the grant. And honestly, your grant document's only going to be about 10 pages long, but that proposal, we're going to reference that, and that'll say all the wonderful science you're doing, what the expected outcomes are, and your grant award is always going to reference that. We'll move on to the next slide here. So to help kind of drive home really a grant and kind of like, okay, what it looks like. And we use this with one of our mission partners, ARO, since they do a lot of grant awards with universities. But really, when you think of a grant, what really comes to my mind and what everyone kind of thinks about is some of y'all that are on the meeting today, you're researchers, you're in your lab, you're in your element. Like, yeah, I've got something really excited that I'm working on. I'm ready for it. This is going to be amazing. You've probably got a couple of grad students with you. You may have on your lab coat. Kind of like this picture here, you see folks are standing over a beaker. You're running an experiment and you're finding out new ideas, new information, and you're contributing to the building blocks of science. You're contributing to that public purpose of furthering science, making more knowledge. So that's really what we're talking about with a grant here, especially with an R&D lens. It's just in the lab doing research. Alternatively, on the other end of the spectrum of assistance awards, we do have a cooperative agreement. Now, cooperative agreements and grants are very, very, very similar. They both have a public purpose of support and stimulation, and that's what we're really after with that. With a cooperative agreement, though, they're very, very, very unique. They're one of the few instruments that there will be substantial government involvement in. There will be collaboration. You can expect the government's going to be in the trenches with you. So that's the hallmark defining characteristic of a cooperative agreement. And I really liken a cooperative agreement and that collaboration to one of our former directors, Thomas Russell of the Army Research Lab, told us ages ago. He views cooperative agreements as, full-on partnerships, that we are so integrated and so intertwined, kind of like my hands are here. My fingers are hooked together, that if the government doesn't do what it needs to do, everything fails. And that if our research partner at the university doesn't do what they're doing, it fails. We're talking about that kind of level of integrated working together, really a true partnership. You can move on to the next slide here. So you may be wondering, well, if I can just do the research on my own and I can do it, why would I potentially want to work with the government or collaborate with them or work with a government researcher? Well, you may have heard of, the acronym THABTO, two heads are better than one, or, the win-win-win-win condition, or folks always say, 1 + 1 = 3, or the sum of the parts is, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And that's really what we're getting at here, is that the two individuals working together, they're going to come up with a solution that's probably better than either one of them could come up on their own. It's going to be better off. It's going to just be like, wow, it could even be a solution neither individual thought of on their own. So you get a much more integrated solution and probably a better overall answer to the question that's being posed in the research. Now, with cooperative agreements, I said there is that substantial government involvement. So the question that might be in the back of your minds right now is, what do we mean by substantial government involvement? What does that actually look like? Is it just lip service? Is it just words on paper? What? When we're talking about those true partnerships, when we're integrated and we're working together in a cooperative agreement, we're looking at things like continual communication. It might not be communication every day, but it could be, at least once a week you're checking in with your government POC, and the government POC is checking in with you. You're planning your experiments together. You're designing that experiment jointly. You're talking about like, well, hey, can we do it this way? Or should we do the experiment this way? You have a shared vision of the research that you're working towards. We've also seen joint publications. There's planned publications that's like both the government's name is on and the researcher at the university, his or her name is on it. If there are inventions, both names will probably be listed on that. We would even see something along the lines like personnel exchanges, where the government researcher would go to the university, maybe for 2, 3, 4 weeks if that's what's needed to do some research. And then at the same time, the researcher at the university would come up to the government facilities for however long is needed to do some research. And again, that substantial government involvement is really key, and that helps with the joint success or joint failure, because with R&D, sometimes things don't necessarily work out, but that's what we mean by substantial government involvement. That's what we're expecting when we talk about cooperative agreements. And again, you may be wondering that, hey, this is awesome. It's great. We can collaborate. We can work with the government. We can get a better solution and a better idea. With every assistance instrument, and I cannot state this enough, and this is really, really, really important, there has to be and there must be a public purpose of support and stimulation. If there is not a public purpose for support and stimulation, you can have the best idea in the world, but it cannot be done as an assistance award. More than likely, it would wind up being a contract. So there always has to be that, hey, we're furthering that scientific knowledge. We're building additional information. Like, there has to be that public purpose there, and that's something that is not always easy, but you got to always make sure it's there when we're dealing with any type of assistance award in general. Now, this is, I got a couple more slides here, and this is just a real quick cheat sheet in case you're wondering. It's like, cool, great, I know what it is. And this slide right here kind of helps everyone identify, if you've received an award, a real easy way to decode what that means. Because looking at the screen here, you see that first number up there, Whiskey 911 Nancy Frank, 22C 0112, and the one beneath it, W911NF 231 0364. What the heck does that mean? And that's a very, very, very valid question, because on the outside looking in, it's gibberish, it's numbers, it could be a combination to someone's locker for all we know. But when we look at that award number specifically, those first 6 digits, that W911NF, that is the PIN or the contracting office identifier for the Research Triangle Park Division. Anything that I sign or any of my colleagues that have a warrant sign will be issued with those first 6 digits, W911NF. The next number in the sequence, that 22, that 23, or that 24, refers to the fiscal year. So that is the fiscal year in which the award is issued. So we're currently in fiscal year 25. So all of our awards would be W911NF 25. Now, it's not calendar year, so there's going to be some time later on this year, after in October, when we switch from fiscal year 25 to fiscal year 26, that even though it's calendar year 25 and a potential award might be issued in October, it will have an FY26 number because we are in fiscal year 26. So that sometimes can throw people for a little bit of a loop there when they're like, wait a minute, this has a 26 number, but it was awarded in October of 25. It's just because of the change in the fiscal year. Now, that third section there where you see the C, the 1, and the 2, that column or that section of the award number identifies the type of funding instrument. A real easy way to tell what you have is if you have a letter in that third section there, whether it's a C, you might see a D, a P, an F, things like that. That means you've got some form of procurement contract. Each one of those letters represents a specific type of contract or a specific type of instrument, but just know you're in a procurement contract environment, you're in a FAR-based environment. Whereas if you see a number, say a 1 or a 2, 1 being a grant, 2 being a cooperative agreement, it's an assistance instrument. You're in an environment in which you're dealing with 2 CFR 200. You're dealing with the Dodgers. It's a non-FAR-based environment. And then, of course, the last 4 digits that you see there is 0112, 0364. That's just that number instrument that we're dealing with or that we have awarded during the year. So we can go ahead and move on to my last slide before I turn the presentation back over to Lanelle. This is just a real quick cheat sheet to give you all some information of, for government lingo, when we talk about things like, say we're dealing with a contract, and I sign a contract. I am a contracting officer when I sign a contract. If I sign an assistance award, which I also am, I can sign grants, cooperative agreements, contracts, and other transactions. You would be dealing with a grants officer for grants and cooperative agreements, whereas for contracts, contracting officer. When we are doing business with somebody, if we issue them a contract, we usually refer to that organization as a contractor. On the assistance instrument side of things, whether it's a grant or cooperative agreement, we refer to them as a recipient. So your government technical POC, the person that is kind of overseeing or watching the effort from the government side, under a contract, we refer to him or her as a contracting officer's representative. Under an assistance award, depending upon whether it's a grant or cooperative agreement, you're going to have a different name. So for our grants, we would have a grants officer representative, a GOR, or you might just hear a technical representative, whereas underneath a cooperative agreement, you would have a CAM or a cooperative agreement manager. They're all the same person. They all kind of fulfill the same role, just a slightly different name depending upon what we're working with. And then last but certainly not least, when we talk about the effort that we're doing under different awards, if we have a contract, we're talking about something, a performance work statement. Sometimes you might hear that called a PWS or a statement of work, an SOW. And that's usually for services. And then if you hear someone talking about specifications, usually that's indicative of some type of supply or some type of physical hard good. Whereas on a grant, as you heard me mention earlier before, we just reference your proposal. There's no description of the work in the grant. We're just going to say, hey, see the recipient's proposal dated such and such. We reference that. And then with a cooperative agreement, it's very similar, where we reference the proposal, or we might have something like a program plan where we kind of say, hey, this is what we're going to do this year. This is what we might do next year. And it could be a 1 year, 2 year, just really depending upon what we're running into. And again, that program plan is very unique to a cooperative agreement. So with that being said, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Lanelle.
All right. Well, thank you. So Will basically has discussed several types of instruments, award instruments. So you may be wondering, well, man, how do I go about getting those instruments? Like, what do we need to do? So one of the terms that you may have heard or you hear about is a solicitation. So the Army might put out a solicitation or request for proposal, RFP. And when the Army puts out those types of instruments, you're basically looking to get a contract award. That's when we issue a solicitation, an RFP so you could obtain a contract award. However, in our case, where we focused really on assistance instruments today, we would issue something called a BAA, or a broad agency announcement. And under a broad agency announcement, it's considered to be competitive, the document itself. There are different research areas. There's different topics in that broad agency announcement. And what you would do, your institution or company, you would propose to a specific topic area in that broad agency announcement. And I will tell you, within the BAA and under the topic areas, there are technical POCs for each topic area. So it's a good idea to reach out to that technical POC to say, hey, is this something that you may be interested in, before, you take the time to write up a proposal under the BAA. So like I said, under a BAA, you can have a grant, a co-op. You can also have a contract under a BAA. And that's when essentially your institution, you would tell us, hey, this is what I can do for you, Army. Here's the research that I could do for something that you may be looking for. And so that's how you would propose your requirement to the government. And so once again, the BAA, it's a method of solicitation and award. It is not an agreement type. Will went over the types of agreements. So, but the BAA is a method of solicitation. It's competitive. Under a BAA, when the proposals are received, we do not evaluate proposals against one another. The proposals they stand alone, and they are evaluated on the specific factors that are in that BAA. And one of the main factors that's always going to be in our BAAs is the scientific and technical merit of your proposal. Your proposal has to show some sort of scientific and technical merit. Also, another evaluation factor will be, how does it serve the purpose of the Army or the government? And I want to say another factor is PI, like the PI at the institution, what are their qualifications? And so down here at the bottom, I've listed one of many BAs, but this is our core BA that is out on the street for the Army Research Laboratory and Army Research Office. This BAA is currently open for 5 years. I think it was issued, you see 23. It's open until I think November 27. But this core BAA, it's about 75 pages. And within that 75 pages, there are it talks about the different types of requirements, like proposals that you could submit. I mean, different types of topics you could submit proposals for. It could be like a conference grant. It could be a single investigator grant. There are short-term grants. So there's a variety of, the BAA lists a variety of types of instruments that you could submit a proposal for. In addition, the BAA also lists the evaluation factors, which is key. It lists the points of contact. It tells you how to submit your proposal for the BAA, and it tells you what type of documents are going to be required for submission. And you're probably like, okay, well, where do I go find this BAA? Many of y'all have heard about grants.gov or sam.gov. So grants.gov is where we would post the BAA, or what we call a funding opportunity announcement for grants and cooperative agreements. So if we were looking for contracts, we would not be posting that at grants.gov. However, at sam.gov, we would post like the solicitation or BAA, and under those announcements, you could get contract, grant, co-op. And there's some other award instruments that we also would do under the BAA. So I highly encourage you to definitely go look at that core BAA that I posted out there. And I would set up probably notifications through sam.gov or grants.gov so you could get notifications of different types of requirements that are being posted out there by the government. Our office issues a variety of BAAs, special notices throughout the year. It could be, we have some specific BAs and FOAs for equipment. We have some for research. Like I said, there's a variety of mechanisms that we have out there for your institution to receive funding from the government. All right. So one of the latest things that came up probably in the past couple of years, and many of y'all have heard about this, or some of y'all may have not, is research protection. And so there is research protection language in, I believe, every announcement that goes out on the street now. And when you say, okay, well, what is research protection? What does it mean? What do you say it's in the announcement? So basically, the Army has what's called an Army Research Risk Assessment Program. And by law, the Army has to do a risk assessment of each proposal that's submitted to identify and mitigate any undue foreign influence that they are able to determine by looking at the proposals. So what they're looking at are the key personnel that are proposed, like your PI, your co-PI, that are proposed for the proposal that you've submitted. And they typically are looking at 4 different areas, risk areas. They're looking at foreign talent. They're looking at the funding sources that conflict with the commitment of that PI and the university. They are looking at to see if that PI has received funding from a strategic competitor. They are looking to see if that PI or co-PI has a pattern or history of affiliation with foreign institutions or a strategic competitor of the US. And so that doesn't mean that your institution would not get the award, but the panel that's put together to review the risk mitigation, they're looking at all that. And what happens, the panel identifies each proposal as either low risk, moderate risk, or high risk. So typically, if your proposal is identified as low risk, we'll go ahead, if your proposal is selected for award, we'll go ahead and proceed with the award. Now, if your proposal has been identified as moderate or high risk, the government may come back to the university and say, hey, this is what we've identified, based on your proposal. How do you, university, plan to mitigate the risk that we have identified? So we give the university an opportunity to come back with their own risk mitigation plan. And what happens, that risk mitigation plan gets put into the award along with the factors, several of the factors that we say, hey, you must do X, Y, and Z to help reduce any risk mitigation. So this started a few years ago where we were reviewing every proposal that comes in for risk mitigation. And it may take a little time sometimes going back and forth, but we want to, do right, obviously, by the US. And that, like I said, that doesn't mean you're not going to receive an award, but we're just looking at it a lot closer to, mitigate any risk. All right. So no cost extensions. So we like to touch on these. If you've heard any of our presentations, no cost extensions. Believe it or not, this causes a burden sometimes for us. But anytime you get an award, say you have a 12-month award and you're coming up on month 10 and you're like, hey, I know I'm not going to be able to get this award completed within 12 months. Go ahead, PI, or work with your sponsored programs office or sponsor program office if you're on the line. Make sure y'all get the request into the government at least 30 days prior to request the no cost extension. Please do not wait until after the award has ended to request the no cost extension. Because I will tell you, it doesn't get approved in all cases. There are times where we do approve no cost extensions, but there are many cases where we do not approve them. Now, when that no cost extension is submitted, please make sure that the request is coming from an authorized university representative and not the PI, because the award the government has is with the institution and not with the PI. So the request needs to come from a representative of the university, an authorized representative, and that request needs to go to either the contracting or grants officer and the government technical person, whether it's a core for a contract, a GOR for a grant, or a cooperative agreement manager for a cooperative agreement. In that request, please make sure you say, hey, this is why I need the request, and this is how long I need the request, the extension for. That's very important. All right, closeouts. So by law, we actually have to close out each federal award that we award. And one of the most important things that we have to close out awards are what's our final reports. We need financial reports, we need technical reports. And so what we have found, we have to go back and keep asking for these final reports. And before we can close out our awards. And so there's money sitting out there, and we want to make sure y'all get paid your, final amount of allotment of money. So definitely please make sure you get your final reports in. If you ever have any questions like about, your final report or how to submit, definitely reach out to your contracting or grants officer. There's language in the awards that tell you where to submit your final reports, how to submit it. But if you have any questions, definitely reach out to our office. We're here to help. And I believe we are at the end. So I think we've allowed, at least 15 minutes for questions. So I know this was probably pretty quick, but I hope that we were able to cover just a few topics that, you were interested in today. And I guess at this time we can entertain any questions.
Thank you so much, Lanelle and William. So at this time, we would like to open the floor for questions, just as Lanelle just stated. So please feel free to open your microphone to direct questions to the speaker of your choice. And I do see that there are a few questions already in the chat, but let's start with the opening of the microphones. So who would like to ask the first question? And as I said, just feel free to unmute yourself. And
I do have a quick question. Hi, this is Rachel.
yes.
So I have faculty members that could potentially be co-PIs, PIs, et cetera, who are technically now citizens of the US, but their home citizenship is a different country. Does that affect anything? Will that have any effect? Or could that potentially be an issue?
Okay, let's see, Lanelle, Ms. Shands, or Mr. Creech. Who would like to take care, or who would like to answer that question? Or is there maybe someone on the Chitra side that would like to answer that?
I can. Oh, if you want to go ahead and answer it,
Go ahead, Will. I'll let you chime in.
Okay. So it's a great question, Rachel, and thank you for that question. When we start talking about citizenship requirements and we talk about, hey, where PIs live and things like that, on assistance awards, most everything that we're doing, or at least a lot of the research awards that we're doing, the focus of it, it's what we kind of term basic and applied research. It's in that 6.1, 6.2 arena if we get a little bit more government technical speak here. And we encourage free and open publication. We don't limit publication on assistance awards. So unless there is something specific, that there's a specific lab that someone needs access to, usually with an assistance award, the PI is going to be the PI. We're going to be looking at qualifications. We're going to be looking at all that. So it's not going to be anything that's like, oh, hey, well, because you're from here, we might not want to work with you or anything like that. Like it's nothing along those lines. When we start dealing with contracts, that's a completely separate story, because on contracts there we can do work with classified information or sensitive information, and there are additional controls and additional measures that can be put in place. So usually on assistance awards, we see individuals from everywhere. The difficult part is going to be that there are some federal labs that foreign nationals or just can't access. So I hopefully that can answer and frames your question a little bit there, Rachel.
No, that answers, that's what I was kind of hoping, but I wasn't sure of, because I knew for like a grant it could be an issue, but I wasn't sure for the like to help for that, but if that would be an issue or not, because we have run into that being an issue for other previous applications for grants. So okay, perfect. That's what I needed to know. Thank you.
Wonderful. All right, do we have another question?
Hi, this is Ganesh Bora from Fayetteville State, and this is about the classified, its contracts are mostly any classified work can be done with the universities. And I suppose like you'll need the SCIF, but how can ARO help the universities who does not have a SCIF?
All right, let's see who's gonna take that question.
I'll chime in here.
Thank you, Lanelle.
So I know. So we're talking about contracts in particular. So, and like I said earlier, I definitely want to do a session on contracts. That gets a little tricky in terms of contracts, in terms of, you said classified information. So what would happen? There are different security documents that would be a part of that contract, and we would work with the security office and the contractor, I guess would be, or university, about the different accesses and how that would be handled. But it's contract specific, and we would be working with the security office and make sure the appropriate forms are filled out before, authorizing any access in terms of in that manner. Will, is there anything else you want to chime in on that?
No, you really hit the nail on the head there. And again, as Lanelle said, it is contract specific. And there, like she said, there's a whole host of regulations. I mean, we probably should eventually, hopefully do a session on contracts. That would be really good. That would take a little bit of time to walk through contracts. It would probably take a lot more than an hour, but specifically, like, yes, there would be different security documents. There'd be different things that we would have to verify in terms of need to know. And then depending upon, like Lanelle said, like what you're dealing with, it might not necessarily be the office that Lanelle or I work with that would issue that award, depending upon what information is needed, what's going to be going into the contract. So there's a lot of things with that. If you're interested in contracts, it's something we probably need to look at, probably trying to do a session on. But your best bet might be to kind of reach out to like a program manager and talk to them if you have an idea about something. And then, they might not be able to help you too terribly much there until we actually know, like, hey, proposal is submitted, it's been evaluated, been reviewed, and things like that. But contracts, it's a separate story once you start getting into classified information.
Thank you.
All right. And William, you also answered Anna's question in the chat because she did want to know if there was going to be a future webinar about contracting. So you took care of two birds there.
Yeah, we definitely would like to do one, Crystal. I don't know how the logistics of that might work out. Might not be anytime soon, but it's something that I would be open to trying to do and help, because it seems like there's some interest in that.
All right. Well, the powers that be that are a part of this meeting are listening, and maybe they can help to put that together. Do we have any additional questions? Is there anyone else here in attendance that would like to unmute and ask a question of Ms. Shands or Mr. Creech?
Hi, this is Tanvir from
Yes.
Mason University. So
Go
I'm a
ahead.
junior faculty, and one of the issues that I face is that how do I start the relationship? So how do I reach out to researchers that are mentioned in the BAAs? I have tried cold emailing them, doesn't work that well.
Okay, I'm quite sure one of our panelists will help you with that.
Oh my gosh, yeah. So, like my first would be like, hey, look at the POC that's for that topic area. I guess sometimes you could reach out to which would be our office, the contracting and grants office. And sometimes we can go directly and talk to a PM ourselves, if they're just not being responsive. I mean, but you got to imagine they're probably getting emails left and right daily. And it's not that they're necessarily ignoring you. It's just so many things are coming across their plate. But we can try to assist in the best way possible to match you up with the appropriate individual. And as you can imagine, with everything going on in the government right now, there's a lot of program managers that have left. And so definitely we want to match you up with, the appropriate person based on your topic area.
So is it okay if we contact you?
Yeah, I mean, I believe, Crystal, is our information provided to the
That's correct. Yes, that's going to be on the closeout slide.
Okay, yeah, we don't have an issue with that. That's fine. And we'll try to get you touch base with the correct POC or link you up with the correct POC.
Perfect. Thank you, Lanelle. For a junior PI, it's life-saving. So thank you.
Okay. All right.
That also answered Vinicius's question, because he also had a question about not being able to get a response from some of those emails. So thank you for explaining that, Lanelle. We have any other questions in the room? We only have a few more moments, about 3 to 4 more minutes. So please take advantage of the opportunity and unmute yourself. Let's see if we have any questions that have not been answered. I see Liz, who's a member of the Chitra team, has been answering some questions already in the chat. We had the question about the citizenship already answered via Rachel asking her question. Let's see. We talked about point of contacts. Lanelle and William are going to have their contact information to share at closeout. It looks like everything that I see in the chat has been answered.
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah, this is Xiao from University of North Texas. So I
Okay.
have a question regarding that. I have the program HBCU-MI program that I reached out to the program manager like the end of last year. So I would sending with white paper. I was told that because of the uncertainty of the funding at that time, so I was told that we should wait for a bit time, a bit longer time until things get been settled. It's just there were a lot of things like going on. So I wonder if now is a good time to get in touch with the program manager again to see like whether we can send white papers or proposals to kind of move forward, or we should wait for like a little bit longer time.
All right. That's a great question. Let's see. Lanelle, William, what do you all think? You have any advice?
So specifically with some of the HBCU-MI work, I'm also over some of that with Miss Evelyn Kent. I don't know if that's potentially one of the announcements that you were talking about, Zhao. There are a couple of different program managers with that one, and usually there are open calls that get put out at various points in the year for Miss Kent's program. You can definitely reach out and at least talk to the program manager in terms of, like, hey, it never hurts to ask, or reach out and say like, hey, I've got this idea. Can I submit a white paper? Or I've got a white paper already written, what do you think about it? Or have that submitted against it. There's never any harm in reaching out. The worst thing that can happen is someone says like, hey, this doesn't necessarily fit, this isn't what we're looking for. But then, you've at least established some contact, and, you might have an idea later on that might work. So I would definitely say, if you don't hear from a program manager, the first time you contact them, you can always reach back out to them a little bit later. Like, it never hurts just to follow up and, keep on asking.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you so much.
Very, very good information. And what an informative presentation. But it is the time for us to wrap up our Q&A session for today. However, you'll see the contact information for our speakers on your screen there. Please feel free to take a photo or a screenshot so that you can follow up with any additional questions or discussions that you may want to have after the webinar. Once again, we would sincerely like to extend our gratitude to Ms. Lanelle T. Shands and Mr. William A. Creech from the Army Contracting Command Research Triangle Park Division for sharing their expertise. And of course, thanks to all of you for joining us today to learn more about how to pursue contract-based research opportunities and engage with the Army through the ACC RTP division. This concludes our presentation. We hope that you have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.